Jai is a young woman from Beijing who has just arrived in the United States to have her baby. Jai, who is still at the airport, feels a wave of anxiety and quickly heads to the restroom, where she takes a moment to compose herself. There, she discreetly ties a waistband over her stomach to conceal her baby bump. She's aware she may not make it in if they find out her intention of coming into the country. She can't wait to be done with this phase. Once she adjusts her clothes, she steps out, ready to go through the entry process. As she leaves the restroom, a female airport staff member approaches her and kindly points her in the right direction for clearance. Despite her fear, Jai takes great care to hide her emotions. Standing in the queue, she is called forward by an immigration officer, who requests to see her passport. As she hands it over, he inquires about her purpose for visiting Seattle and Los Angeles during the holidays. Jai pretends not to understand the language, hoping to avoid further scrutiny. Fortunately, the airport staff member clears her, and she proceeds to the departure exit to await the pickup driver she arranged in advance to take her to her destination. However, her patience wears thin as the driver fails to show up on time. He has no reason whatsoever. He knows her time of arrival. Frustrated, she takes a seat and continues to wait. Finally, after 30 minutes, a car pulls up before her and a man steps out, offering his sincere apologies for the delay. Jai is beyond furious. Exhausted from a grueling 12-hour flight, she can't believe the nerve of this driver, making excuses for leaving her out in the cold. Jai transfers all her frustration and anger towards him, unleashing a barrage of criticism for keeping her waiting for so long and making her sit in the cold. Moments after she gets in the car, she starts yelling. Startled by her outburst, the driver opens the door, and Jai points to a pet mouse in the car, questioning why he would have it as a passenger during a bird flu outbreak. He suggests that she move to the front seat instead. Their journey begins and Jai gazes out at the streets, trying to calm herself. Soon they arrive at the first maternity home, only to find police officers raiding the place. The driver remarks that they're fortunate to have avoided that situation. They both get back in the car, searching for another maternity home. They drive through a secluded area, and Jai starts feeling uneasy and asks to see the driver's license. He obliges and she takes a photo of it, informing him that she has sent it to her friends and family, in case he turns out to be a psycho. Surprisingly, he smiles at her remark. Curious, Jai asks for his name, and he responds that it's Frank. Frank keeps driving, until he suddenly stops in front of a building. He tells her it's a maternity house run by a Taiwanese woman, Mrs. Hong. They both enter the house, and the woman shows her around, explaining the cost of living there and the feeding routine. When Jai sees the room, she's not impressed and asks for the suite option, which isn't available. She insists and offers to pay double the price for the suite. However, since the suite is not an option, because 2 old occupants stay in each room, they will be there until they are put to bed. She decides to stay in the provided room, and hopes all this is sorted by the next day. Jai prepares to rest for the day, and tries to call her boyfriend. But once again his number is unreachable. She hasn't been able to reach him for a while now. The next morning, Jai is startled awake by a loud noise coming from the neighboring room. Curious, she enters the room and accidentally knocks down a pregnant woman while opening the door. Profusely apologizing, Jai decides to go downstairs and discuss the room situation with Mrs. Huang. In the common area, she notices several other pregnant women staying in the maternity ward. Jai asks Mrs. Huang about the possibility of changing rooms, only to be informed that all the available rooms are already occupied. She is told that she will need to wait for one of the occupants in the suites to vacate so she can take over, as the occupant refused the option of swapping with her. Dissatisfied with this response, Jai offers Mrs. Huang additional money to secure a room immediately. Mrs. Huang accepts the offer. Jai is happy about the room change, but the other occupants in the maternity ward, not impressed by Jai's show of wealth, curiously inquire why Mrs. Huang agreed to give up her room to this new occupant. Unimpressed by the lunch provided, Jai expresses her preference for seafood instead. The next day, Frank drives Jai to register with the hospital and see a doctor. She informs him that the doctor must meet specific criteria, being Chinese, speaking Mandarin, be expensive, and being registered to work in the USA. As they arrive at the hospital, Jai is handed a form to fill out. Since she doesn't understand English, Frank helps her fill in her information. After the hospital visit, Frank drives Jai to a seafood cold room, where exotic species of seafood are sold. Jai picks up an expensive crab and offers to pay for the fish Frank picked. However, he declines her gesture. They then head back to the maternity ward, and later in the evening, Jai joins the other occupants in the common room to watch a movie. She realizes she has already seen the movie, and unintentionally starts giving away spoilers. This angers one of the housemates, Joe, and they begin to exchange heated words. The situation escalates, and one of the occupants slaps Jai after she brags about being rich and having a wealthy boyfriend. Hearing the commotion, Mrs. Huang rushes downstairs to separate them, and orders everyone back to their respective rooms. Jai has been feeling anxious after spending several days days in the USA without being able to reach her boyfriend. To pass the time and distract herself, she asks Frank to drive her to a club. There, she takes a few shots of alcohol and sends pictures of Frank to her boyfriend, teasing him that other men are now interested in her, since he hasn't been checking up on her. JJ then joins Frank at the bar and asks him how he manages without his wife, as he mentioned earlier that he stays with his daughter, while his wife is in another town. Frank tells her that he copes just fine. He advises her to refrain from drinking alcohol. He also warns her that being in a place like this, considering her condition, is not good for the baby. JJ thinks that Frank is judging her and begins to cry. She tells him if he knows the number of girls who wouldn't keep their pregnancy. She tells him her baby daddy to be Zhang is married and refuses to get a divorce from his wife. As such, she cannot legally have her child in Beijing. She tells him her baby daddy isn't emotionally there for her and only sends her money. Frank sees that her outburst is because of the alcohol she has taken and decides to take her back to the maternity house. The next morning, her baby daddy calls, asking whose picture she sent to him last night and why she's hanging out with the man. She laughs it off and says it's nothing, just a joke. She also reveals they will be having a son, as she has had an ultrasound already. Her baby daddy Zhang is happy to hear this and promises to come to visit her in the coming months. JJ is filled with excitement at the prospect of his visit. Being alone without any friends or visitors, she often becomes the subject of gossip among the other residents in the house, who wonder why she doesn't have a partner who cares enough to visit. Aside from the joy of having Zhang's company, she is also thrilled about having enough money to indulge in luxury items for herself. JJ calls on Frank to drive her to go shopping. While at the shop, she shares with him her plans for Zhang's arrival at Christmas and how she would like him to drive them around. She offers to pay him double for his services. However, Frank declines the offer, explaining that his daughter's mother will be coming around for Christmas, which may limit his availability to assist JJ. Finally, Christmas arrives, and JJ eagerly anticipates Zhang's presence. Coping with her pregnancy alone hasn't been easy, and she longs for his support. Mrs. Huang's daughter, son-in-law, and grandson come to visit and bring gifts. Everyone celebrates and dances together. Suddenly, there's a knock on the door, and JJ rushes to check, hoping it's Zhang. To her disappointment, it turns out to be a gift package containing a designer bag. There's an apology note from Zhang, explaining that he couldn't leave his family to be with her during the festive period, but he assures her that they will see each other at another time. Feeling heartbroken by the news, JJ decides to visit Frank's house. When she enters, Frank is surprised to see her, because he wasn't expecting her. JJ admires Frank's home decoration and compliments his good taste. She asks about his daughter and why he's alone at home. Frank explains that his daughter's mom came to pick her up for an event. JJ offers to cook dinner for him. Just as they're about to start, Frank's phone rings. It's Julie's mom, calling in a panic because their daughter is having another asthma episode. Frank rushes to the venue and finds Julie's mom standing with a man who is carrying their daughter. He quickly gets Julie's inhaler. Thankfully, she starts feeling better. Frank offers to take her home, and her mom agrees, returning to the event. However, Frank suspects that his daughter is okay, and that pretending to have an asthma attack is her way of escaping from the situation. Julie confesses to him that she was tired of the event and couldn't stand her mom's perfume, so she faked the crisis to be able to leave. JJ spends the whole of Christmas Eve with Frank and Julie, watching the sky and admiring the fireworks. She can't help but smile at how incredibly good a father he is to his daughter and the bond they share. This is the kind of father she hopes her unborn son will have. Zhang isn't living up to the expectations. So far, he has only provided finances in this journey. He hasn't been available, physically or emotionally. She goes back to the maternity in the morning, only to find Joe, a resident in the maternity, sitting on the couch in a puddle of water. She thinks Joe has urinated, but soon realizes Joe's water has broken and she is in labor. Joe is screaming for her to call 911. Mrs. Huang isn't home. JJ tries to put a call across to Frank, but he isn't picking up. She runs barefoot outside until she finds a vehicle that conveys Joe to the hospital. Moments later, Joe delivers a baby boy. JJ learns that Joe is pregnant via a sperm donor and has a girlfriend and not a boyfriend or husband. Meanwhile, Frank rushes to the hospital upon seeing a series of missed calls from JJ. He arrives at the hospital, he asks her what the matter is, and she explains everything to him. He heaves a sigh of relief, thinking something bad had happened to her. Then he notices she is barefoot. Frank removes his boot to give it to her. At that moment, JJ feels her baby kicking for the first time and excitedly tells Frank, who places his hand on her belly and softly speaks to the baby. Once again, JJ wishes Zhang were there. Days later, they all return to the maternity home, including Joe and the baby. Frank brings his daughter Julie to stay, while he picks her up later in the day. JJ sits with Julie and asks what her dad is up to. Julie tells her that her dad is sitting for the medical council exam board to become a practicing medical doctor in the USA. JJ didn't know that Frank is a doctor waiting to pass his exam, and that he drives a taxi as a side hustle. Feeling bored the next day, JJ decides to pick up Julie from school so they can hang out together. She suggests they go to New York for sightseeing. Unfortunately, JJ is arrested for being with an underage girl. JJ and Julie find themselves in an ugly situation, as they are taken to the police station for questioning. She calls Frank and informs him. Upon receiving the news, Frank swiftly arrives at the station. He identifies himself as Julie's father and learns that an investigation is underway regarding JJ, who is pregnant but only holds a travel visa. Realizing the potential consequences, Frank, although angered, expresses concern for JJ's fate. Frank informs JJ that she faces the risk of deportation. However, he manages to convince the authorities that they are a couple, and advises JJ to maintain the same story during the questioning. This is crucial for her to be allowed to remain in the United States. During their separate interviews, both JJ and Frank stand their ground, asserting that they are in a committed relationship and have plans to marry. Their unwavering stance convinces the police, who ultimately release them. After being cleared to go home, Frank is still angry over JJ's decision to take his daughter to New York without his permission. He confronts her outside, but JJ, who has had enough and is stressed for the day, tells him she paid all the fares. She feels Julie was the one who reported her to the police. Frank retorts that the only thing she cares about is money, and nothing else. This makes her angry. She tells him she knows he is with Julie's mom only because of her money, accusing him of being a deadbeat father. Hearing this, Julie begins to cry. JJ realizes she must have crossed the line and apologizes to them. The next scene shows JJ at the hotel reception, attempting to pay for the room she booked. The male receptionist informs her that the card has been declined. Surprised, she asks him to try again. He makes another attempt, but the payment doesn't go through again. This has never happened to her before. Just then, Frank enters and asks what the matter is. She explains that her card is experiencing issues, and pleads for his help in paying for her room while she sorts out the problem. She enters her hotel room and places a call to Jean, but notices that his line has been disconnected. She reaches out to his friends to help connect her to Jean, but none of them can tell her where Jean is. As reality begins to sink in, she starts to panic. JJ goes to Frank's room and asks him what's wrong. She explains that she has been unable to contact Jean. Even his friends don't know where he is. She's worried that something terrible might have happened to him. JJ confesses to Frank that she doesn't have any money with her, and she's afraid that if she has been cut off from using his card, she won't know what to do. Trying to offer comfort, Frank advises her to stay calm while they try to find out what happened to Jean. He suggests using an old Indian method of sorcery to seek answers. Taking her hair clip from the table, he asks if Jean is deceased and spins it. The clip points to no, indicating that he is still alive. JJ wants to try again, but Frank explains that they can only do it once a day. The next day, JJ goes to the maternity lodge and learns that someone called asking about her. She quickly gets the caller's number and contacts them. The person on the other end turns out to be Mrs. Zhang, who reveals that Zhang has been arrested for fraud. He is currently at the police station in detention. Shocked by the news, JJ realizes that she is considered an accomplice and is being sought after by the authorities. The police became suspicious due to her extravagant spending. JJ can't believe what she's hearing and fears that her future in this situation is bleak. JJ has decided to sell her luxury items, both the ones she acquired and those gifted to her by Zhang, to raise some money. Earlier, Frank asked her about her intentions, and she confidently informed him that she will proceed to have her child and embrace motherhood. While she remains uncertain about Zhang's release from prison, she believes he would find happiness in knowing he has a son. JJ is determined to prove to others that she is motivated by more than just money. The following day, one of the pregnant residents summons JJ into a room and generously offers the baby products that she had purchased on sale for a fair price. Overwhelmed by the lady's kindness, JJ decides to express her gratitude by gifting her one of her expensive handbags. During their conversation, the resident reveals that she had previously spoken to Mrs. Zhang over the phone when JJ wasn't around, and is aware of JJ's current financial situation. In light of this, she advises JJ to prioritize finding a single man who loves her and treats her with kindness, emphasizing that she truly deserves the best. This heartfelt advice brings tears to JJ's eyes. The next scene shows JJ and Mrs. Huang in a conversation. Mrs. Huang tells JJ she may not be around when she delivers. She says her daughter, who is married and pregnant, needs her around. Having taken care of pregnant women for a long time, it is wise to extend such care to her daughter too. She apologizes to JJ and offers to pay her the balance of the deposit she had paid. Meanwhile, Frank agrees to accommodate JJ until she has her child. Days later, JJ moves in with Frank. She occupies one of the rooms in the house and helps Frank prepare breakfast for his daughter for school. She notices Frank has been moody for days, so she decides to inquire about the cause of his moodiness. He reveals to her that his ex-wife, Julie's mom, is getting married in a week, and she's taking Julie along, since she can afford Julie's school fees and other expenses. JJ doesn't buy this. She tells him he's a better parent to their child, and should keep her. Just being able to pay bills doesn't make a person a good choice of a parent, she says. In cases like this, Julie should decide whom she wants to live with. JJ informs him that she is in a perfect position to emphasize that luxury and expensive gifts cannot replace genuine love. Frank shares that he has been with Julie since birth, building cherished memories, but also acknowledges the importance of a maternal figure in her life. As Frank and JJ grow closer, he struggles to suppress his feelings for her. He convinces himself that everything will be fine once JJ has her baby and returns to China. On his ex-wife's wedding day, Frank accompanies her to the hospital for a routine checkup, rushing to make it in time for the wedding ceremony. Suddenly, he spots JJ at the wedding venue, who joins him and inquires about Julie's absence. Frank explains that Julie's mother sent her to a music camp, where she is happily engaged. Meanwhile, as the two couples exchange their wedding vows, Frank realizes he is still wearing their wedding ring. Swiftly, he removes it and discreetly stashes it in his pocket. During the wedding, Frank's ex-wife and her new husband approach him to express their gratitude for his presence. Seizing the opportunity, JJ introduces herself to them as Frank's girlfriend, proudly sharing that they are expecting a child together. Frank can tell his ex is confused, even though she tries to act unaffected. Soon, the couple begins to dance. JJ holds onto Frank tightly. Then JJ collapses into Frank's arms. Frank calls her name and shakes her. It's obvious she has lost consciousness. Frank drives her to the hospital while he goes over her results. He is furious, realizing they should never have let JJ go in her condition. She has developed pregnancy-induced hypertension. As soon as they arrive at the hospital, JJ is being prepped for an emergency cesarean section. Before being wheeled into the operating room, JJ pleads with Frank, expressing her strong desire to give birth naturally if possible. The cost of a cesarean birth is high. She fears she won't be able to afford it. 3 days later, JJ awakens in her hospital bed, finding Frank by her side, his head resting on the bed as he naps. She gently taps his head, and he raises it, a smile gracing his face. Concerned, he asks how she feels. Weakened, JJ musters a smile and inquires about her baby's whereabouts. Frank reassures her that their baby is doing well, weighing 3.9 kilograms, a healthy bundle of joy. He commends her for her strength during the delivery. Moreover, he reveals that she slipped into a coma following the surgery, due to pregnancy-induced hypertension. Throughout their hospital stay, Frank remains attentive to JJ and their newborn. Witnessing his unwavering support and care, JJ can't help but feel overwhelmed by his exceptional qualities as a father and husband. It becomes evident to her that any woman fortunate enough to have him in her life is truly blessed. During their time in the hospital, as her son Mau Mau receives treatment for jaundice, Frank continues to take exemplary care of both JJ and the baby. The nurses are impressed by his dedication, assuming him to be JJ's husband and the baby's father. Frank covers all the hospital expenses, ensuring that they are taken care of without any financial burden. Mau Mau soon recovers from jaundice, and JJ is fit to go home. They are both discharged from the hospital and move in to stay with Frank while awaiting clearance to return to their country. JJ enjoys her time at Frank's house, where Julie is now back with her father, who has gained full custody. They all live together as one big family. However, JJ finds herself completely falling in love with Frank. She adores his thoughtfulness, easygoing nature, and kindness. She never imagined someone could love another so effortlessly, without expecting anything in return or seeking payment. Frank loves her unconditionally. Julie, too, is an adorable girl, and they all get along well. JJ often wonders how it would be if they were a real family. A few days later, they all go to spend the evening in the garden. As they head back home, a car pulls over, and JJ looks to see Mr. Zhang's driver. The driver steps forward and announces that he's here to pick up JJ and the baby, following Mr. Zhang's instructions. This news breaks Frank's heart. He has grown used to JJ's presence, which completes his home. He always knew she would leave someday, but it still hurts nonetheless. Frank refuses the money JJ offers as a refund for all the hospital bills he has paid, despite her insistence. Instead, he places the money as a gift for little Mau Mau. As JJ turns to leave, Frank can feel tears welling up in his eyes. Mr. Zhang has been cleared of the alleged crime, and is currently going through a divorce with his wife. JJ and their son Mau Mau have returned to live in the Zhang mansion, which is what JJ always wanted. However, the fancy things, servants, and designer items no longer make her happy. She often daydreams about being married to Frank and living a joyful life. After 2 years, the situation between JJ and Zhang hasn't improved. He is rarely at home, and she hardly sees him. Whenever she expresses her desire to spend more time with him, he criticizes her, saying that he's busy making money and she should be satisfied with what he has provided. JJ can't bear this situation any longer. She doesn't want to continue living this way when there's a better partner out there for her. Despite Mr. Zhang's threats to cut her and their son off if she leaves, JJ decides to end the relationship. She leaves to start a fresh life, doing what she loves most, being a successful food blogger. She supports herself and her son with the income generated from her blog. Even though she doesn't have luxuries, she is happy. Meanwhile, Frank has passed his medical exams, and he is now a licensed doctor in the United States. He still carries a love for JJ in his heart, and whenever Julie asks about her, he tells Julie that JJ is living her best life and being a wonderful mother to their son. Frank hopes to meet JJ again someday. By fate's intervention, JJ returns to the United States. She happens to be visiting a tourist attraction where, coincidentally, Frank and Julie are also present. Out of the blue, Julie decides to send JJ a selfie of herself and her dad, which surprises JJ upon seeing it, as she realizes they are at the same location. They meet for the first time in over 2 years, and both of them are overjoyed to see each other. Frank learns that JJ is now single, and they officially start dating. They are deeply in love and blissfully happy, marking the beginning of their beautiful love story.